The Silent Architect, The Hidden Psychology of Faye, Laufey in God of War. What if the most powerful character in God of War never said a single word on screen, and yet planned everything you did from the very beginning? Before we dive in, if this analysis speaks to your soul, subscribe to the channel, drop a like, and let's keep uncovering the hidden layers of gaming's greatest stories together. Every theory, every detail, every secret, right here. 1. She was never absent. She was always present. Faye, born Laufey the Just among the giants of Jotunheim, died before the events of God of War, 2018. She is ash carried in a vase. She is a voice Kratos recalls in a single line. She is an absence so heavy it presses down on every scene. And yet, by the time the credits roll, it becomes undeniable. Faye is the most psychologically complex character in the entire Norse saga. This is the paradox that defines her. She is physically absent and narratively omnipresent. Everything Kratos and Atreus do, every path they walk, every enemy they face, every revelation that lands like a hammer blow, has Faye's fingerprints on it. She did not die and leave chaos behind. She died and left a masterwork. She asked that her ashes be spread at the highest peak of all the realms. That one wish delivered in the opening minutes is not grief. It is architecture. Understanding Faye's psychology requires us to accept something unusual. She operated from a position of almost perfect foreknowledge, shaped that foreknowledge through decades of careful action, and then chose to step aside. Not out of powerlessness, but out of a calculated and deeply emotional form of love. She is a character defined by restraint, not absence. 2. Living inside a future. She could already see. Faye was a giant, one of the Jötnar, and the giants of God of War were not merely large humanoids. They were seers. Their temples, their tapestries, their entire culture was built around the act of inscribing prophecy into stone. They recorded futures as a people record history, methodically, painfully, with the full understanding that knowing the future does not make it hurt less when it arrives. Faye had access to the Jotunheim murals. She saw the entirety of Atreus and Kratos' journey depicted in advance. She saw her son's dual nature, his future identity as Loki, the role he would play in bringing about Fimbulwinter, and, further down the timeline, Ragnarok itself. She saw Kratos' death, or near death, depicted on those walls, and she chose to remain silent about all of it. Psychological lens. Epistemic isolation. Carrying knowledge that cannot be shared creates a form of profound loneliness that psychologists recognize in caregivers, intelligence officers, and terminally ill patients who hide their condition from family. Faye lived inside this epistemic isolation for the entirety of her marriage and motherhood. She loved Kratos and Atreus while holding a secret that dwarfed anything they shared together. This is not a small thing. The psychological weight of knowing the future, particularly a painful one, while being unable to warn the people you love, is a form of ongoing trauma. Faye did not get to grieve in stages. She had to live in the grief of anticipating loss, while simultaneously building the life that would eventually fulfill that prophecy. 3. The most radical act was stillness. Faye was not fragile. Every account of her in the game, through Kratos' few words, Mimir's reverence, the carvings, the enemies she is said to have slain, paints a portrait of a warrior of extraordinary capability. She fought Odin's forces. She resisted the Aesir for years. She carved the runes that would protect her son from godly detection. She felled the trees that would mark Kratos and Atreus' journey before she ever fell ill. And then she stopped fighting. She married a mortal-seeming man, lived in a cottage in Midgard, and raised a child in deliberate quiet. This was not retreat. This was the most demanding form of discipline, the kind that requires you to know exactly how capable you are and choose not to use that capability. Warriors who choose peace do not lose the warrior, they integrate it. Faye's tactical mind did not disappear into domesticity. It was redirected entirely toward her family's survival. Every lesson she taught Atreus, every carving she left, every tree she marked, these were acts of combat by another name. She was fighting for her son's future with the only weapons that future allowed her to use. Her core trait was strategic restraint. Her shadow trait was controlled deception. Her deepest fear was Atreus arriving at his destiny unprepared, and her love language was never protection. It was preparation. 4. She chose what Kratos would discover, and when. One of the most psychologically sophisticated aspects of Faye's character is what she chose not to reveal. She never told Kratos he was a god in the Norse sense. She never told Atreus his true name was Loki. She never explained the mural in Jotunheim, never warned them about the Aesir's full danger, never disclosed her own giant heritage to Atreus directly. This is not negligence. It is an expert application of a psychological principle that therapists and educators recognize as scaffolded revelation. The idea that some truths cannot be received until the receiver has built enough internal structure to hold them without collapsing. Faye understood, perhaps better than anyone, that Kratos needed to come to certain realizations through experience rather than instruction. She trusted the journey to do what her words never could. That is not cowardice. That is a profound, aching faith in the people she loved. Consider what she knew about Kratos, a man so armored against his past that he could not speak of it, could not process it, could not mourn it. A man who carried the ash of his murdered family on his skin for decades. If Faye had told him everything about prophecy, about Atreus's destiny, about the war to come, Kratos would have either fled into denial or collapsed into despair. Instead, she gave him the one thing he was actually capable of receiving: a task. Scatter my ashes. Walk with your son. Do this one thing. And in doing that one thing, he would become capable of everything else. 5. She loved the man who was trying to become something different. Faye knew who Kratos was. She knew his history, the ghost of Sparta, the slaughter of gods, the rivers of blood. She did not love him despite this knowledge. She loved him within it, and she chose him specifically because of what he was in the process of becoming rather than what he had been. This is a psychologically distinct form of love. It is not naive love, the kind that ignores damage. It is not redemptive love, the kind that attempts to fix a broken person. It is witnessing love, the kind that sees someone clearly, holds space for both who they were and who they are fighting to become, and chooses to invest in that becoming without demanding it arrive on schedule. Psychological lens, witnessing love versus fixing love. Most relationships in fiction are built on one person saving another. Faye's relationship with Kratos inverts this entirely. She did not need saving, and she refused to position herself as his savior. She simply stood beside him and believed in a version of him he had not yet fully inhabited. The profound effect of this is visible in how Kratos behaves after her death. He is not broken by grief alone. He is broken by the awareness that she believed in him, and he must not waste that belief. There is something extraordinarily moving in the fact that Faye, who had seen the future, who knew the cost, chose this man, this family, this life. She was not trapped by prophecy. She was its author in every way that mattered. She looked at all the possible futures and said, "This one, this man, this sun, this mountain." 6. She raised Loki without ever telling him he was Loki. Atreus's name itself is a revelation disguised as an inheritance. Faye named him Atreus, a Spartan warrior Kratos had known and admired, as a bridge between his father's world and his own. But she always intended for him to eventually know his giant name. Loki. She was raising a child into a dual identity without letting him know he was dual. From a developmental psychology perspective, this is a staggering act of intentional parenting. Faye wanted Atreus to first build a stable self, curious, compassionate, connected to his humanity, before he could safely integrate the weight of his divine and giant heritage. She had seen what premature revelation of divine identity could do. She had watched gods raise children as instruments. She refused to do that to her son. Every lesson she taught him about the natural world, about tracking animals, about reading signs in the forest. These were also lessons in humility, in careful observation, in the understanding that the world is larger than you and must be read rather than conquered. She was shaping a mind that would eventually have to comprehend cosmic stakes, and she started with trees and animal tracks. She made him a hunter before she needed him to understand he was a god. She gave him roots before she expected him to grow wings. 7. Was Faye manipulative? Or was she merciful? Here is where Faye's psychology becomes genuinely complex and morally ambiguous. She manipulated the people she loved. She withheld information that would have fundamentally changed their choices. She orchestrated events, carved the path, and then stepped off it, leaving Kratos and Atreus to walk a road they thought they were choosing freely. Is this manipulation? Technically, yes. Psychologically, the picture is more nuanced. Faye was not withholding information for her own benefit. She was not deceiving them to maintain power over them. She was operating from a position of prophetic knowledge, in a world where the gods of Asgard could detect and destroy giants, and half-giants, and where Atreus' survival depended on his own ignorance of his nature until he was strong enough to survive the revelation. Psychological lens. Benevolent deception. Faye's choices map closely onto what philosophers call benevolent deception, concealing truth to protect a loved one from harm. It is common in end-of-life care, in parenting, in wartime. It is almost always done with love, and it almost always leaves complicated feelings in the people who eventually discover they were deceived. Kratos' journey through the game is partly a journey through the emotions of someone discovering that the person they loved most trusted them least with the full truth. The deception was protective, but protective deception carries its own costs. It robs the deceived of autonomy, of the ability to make fully informed choices about their own lives. Atreus could have processed his identity with his mother present rather than discovering it as a catastrophic revelation mid-journey. This ambiguity is what makes Faye a great character, not a perfect one. 8. She did not die. She stepped aside. Faye's death is framed as illness. She grew sick and passed before the game begins. But given what we know about her foreknowledge and her careful orchestration of events, it is impossible to dismiss a more unsettling reading. Faye may have understood from the murals that her presence would prevent the journey from unfolding as it needed to. A living Faye is a Faye who protects, a Faye who intervenes, a Faye who might short-circuit the exact experiences Kratos and Atreus need to have in order to become who they must be. Her death, whatever its literal cause, functions narratively and psychologically as the ultimate act of stepping back. She cleared the stage so that her husband and son could find each other and find themselves. This reading of her death reframes grief itself. The entire emotional arc of God of War 2018, Kratos learning to open to his son, Atreus learning to trust his father, both of them processing love and loss in real time, is Faye's legacy. She engineered a journey that grief would power. She bet everything on the idea that love, even broken and ash-scattered, could bring a broken father and a sick son to the highest peak in all the realms. She could not be with them, so she became the reason they had to go. There is no greater love in any of the 9 realms. 9. The hidden architecture. Most players never notice. She marked the trees. Before she died, Faye physically walked through the forests of Midgard and marked the specific trees that Kratos would use to build her funeral pyre. She had to know, from the murals, which trees he would choose, and she marked them in advance. She was not just planning her death. She was choreographing the very act of her mourning. This level of detail is not grief management. It is direction, the runes that hid Atreus from Odin. One of the under-discussed details of the lore is that Faye spent years carving specific runic protections around their home and onto Atreus, hiding his divine and giant nature from Odin's ravens and seers. This required not just magical skill, but an intimate knowledge of Aesir detection methods. Faye had studied her enemies with the precision of a spy, then used that knowledge to build an invisible fortress around her son. She chose Kratos. Knowing his Greek identity. The murals suggest Faye knew exactly who Kratos was, not just the man in front of her, but the god of war, the Spartan, the figure who had toppled the entire Greek pantheon. She chose him anyway. This makes her love one of the most clear-eyed acts of acceptance in any game narrative. She did not fall for a stranger. She chose the most dangerous being in any realm with full knowledge and full intention. She left no message. Perhaps the most devastating psychological detail is that Faye left no letter, no spoken record, no final words preserved by Mimir or anyone else. She trusted that the journey itself, the ash, the mountain, the encounters along the way, would say everything she needed to say. That confidence is either the most arrogant thing imaginable or the most profound act of trust in the power of lived experience over explanation. Given everything we know of Faye, it was almost certainly the latter. She felled the trees herself. There is a haunting specificity to the detail that Faye personally cut down the trees whose wood would become her pyre. She swung the axe. She did the physical labor. The woman who would become ash made the fire herself. This is not morbid. It is the purest expression of her psychology. Total ownership over her own story, from beginning to end, including the ending. X. The echo that shaped a saga. In God of War Ragnarok, Faye's presence becomes even more profound in retrospect. The Aesir's fear of giants, and specifically of Atreus/Loki, is rooted in prophecy that Faye would have understood intimately. Odin's obsession with controlling fate, with unmaking prophecy, is in many ways a war against everything Faye stood for. She believed in fate not as a cage, but as a framework within which love and choice still operate. Odin sees fate as an enemy to be destroyed. Faye saw it as a river to be navigated. Atreus, in Ragnarok, grapples constantly with questions of destiny, identity, and the right to choose one's own path. These are exactly the questions Faye spent her entire life sitting with. Her son inherited not just her giant blood, but her central psychological conflict. What does it mean to know the future and still have to live the present? And Kratos, in Ragnarok, becomes the father Faye always believed he could be. He makes choices she would have recognized, choosing to protect over to dominate, choosing to listen over to command, choosing love over legacy. He becomes, in some sense, the man she always saw when she looked at him. She was right about him, and she never got to see it. That is the final tragedy and the final grace of Faye's story. She planned the journey. She shaped the travelers. She trusted the destination, even though she would never arrive there with them. That is what it means to love without conditions and without limits. Faye is proof that the most powerful character in a story doesn't need a single line of dialogue. only a design that echoes through every moment. If this analysis resonated with you, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a deep dive, and leave a like to let us know you want more hidden psychology from gaming's greatest worlds. See you in the next one.